Hey guys, it is still way too warm in the UK, and I wanted to make a video talking about the Flamethrower no longer scaling with cast speed for its rotation rate change, why I find the change confusing, is it or isn't it a buff? Because there's been some talk about it. In my video I said I don't know why they've done this, they've just removed functionality, and there's been some Reddit threads and I've tweeted about it and stuff, and some people are like, this is a nerf, some people are like, this is a buff, you're stupid. So, a stupid man is going to explain his thought process on why it's either the same or worse. Right, so I've drawn a Flamethrower Trap. I'll explain why I've drawn it the way I've drawn it. It's very important when you're drawing these, you try not to make offensive imagery. So, this is the center of the trap here, right? It's got 4 things that stick out and it spins round. And you can kind of think of it just like making a circle. Now, obviously, you only deal damage when these parts of the enemy... when these parts of the trap connect to the enemy. Not a lot of people know this, but Flamethrower Trap has a set hit rate. I believe it's 10, I can't recall exactly. But it can only hit an enemy a set amount of times a second. So, with that knowledge, you're like, well, if the flame can only hit an enemy a set amount of times per second... well, as long as it can hit the enemy that many times, it doesn't matter how fast or slow it goes, because it's not like you're getting more hits by it going faster. And that's technically correct. So what tends to happen a lot with Path of Exile, I find, is people, they do the maths, and they don't actually play the skill. Like, they'll be like, well, on paper, this is better, so it's better. But they never actually play with it. So with Flamethrower Trap, if you throw the Flamethrower Trap directly on top of the enemy, and the enemy doesn't move, so it's always in the middle, so it's always in connection with one of the 4 flames, then it doesn't matter how fast or slow it spins, you'll always be getting enough hits. So in that case, the skill is unchanged, it's exactly the same. So in that case, and it's the best case scenario, you throw it directly on top of the enemy, it's the same. Making something the same isn't a buff, the skill is the same. In the case of an enemy being, say, here, 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 or here, basically close to the center of the 4 flames, you'll probably still hit it enough times with a slow rotation speed that the damage will be the same. The problem comes in the further down the area you get, and also the larger the area of your Flamethrower Trap, the more dead space you have. So let's say that you've got an enemy who's bang here, right? He's just on the edge, and he would get clipped by the time the Flamethrower spins round. The slower the Flamethrower Trap spins, the longer your dead zone. Does that sort of make sense? Because you're not dealing any damage while the flame isn't connecting with an enemy. And I don't know off the top of my head if the base rotation speed is fast enough to guarantee getting the 10 hits. So I don't know off the top of my head if an enemy connecting just right on the edge in the time it takes will get the full damage. If it does, great. In which case, the damage is still the same. But it takes longer for the enemy to get hit. So it really kind of depends on what you want the skill to do. If, for example, you're using the skill just for boss damage, and you're always just throwing it, and it's always landing perfectly, and you're always getting the full connection, it's the same. You could potentially make the argument that it was possible before to get enough cast speed that the flame would rotate so quickly that you would never get your full, like, 10 hits or whatever it is. But that's ignoring the fact that the faster the flame is moving, the faster it is reconnecting. And the slower the flame is moving, the longer it takes for it to reconnect, right? Flamethrower traps last for a duration. You scale a bunch of duration, you get a really long set of Flamethrower Trap. You throw about a bunch of Flamethrower Traps. When I played it, I always found that cast speed just made it feel more consistent. wasn't necessarily a case of like, oh, my damage is now 1,000,000 times stronger, but it just made the thing feel more consistent. It could be possible that at certain thresholds it was in fact actually nerfing my damage or whatever, but whenever I use the skill, I always found that just having a little bit of cast speed, it just made it feel a bit nicer. So yeah. So the reality of the situation is in a lot of cases, it's the same. In some cases, it could potentially be better, and in some cases, it will be worse. I wouldn't call that a buff. I would say they've just removed a mechanic. So it's the sort of change that if I had to make a list of these are things we've buffed and say underrepresented gems we've buffed, I wouldn't put that in there. And if it is genuinely a buff, like a noticeable buff, I would have put it in there and explained, well, actually, it increases your overall uptime, etc., etc. A lot of people have been saying to me, Tarke, think of it like ball lightning. So with ball lightning, you want ball lightning, to go as slow as possible so it's connecting with the enemy, so you're getting the longest uptime. I don't think that's a very fair comparison to make, because if you shoot out a ball lightning, right, and this is just traveling, it sods off because it doesn't come back to hit the enemy. Whereas the Flamethrower Trap, it reconnects with the enemy. So yeah, it might get off the enemy faster, but it's going to reconnect faster with more cast speed. So yeah, that's my thought process. If you want to use Flamethrower Trap, it will still be good. I always liked Flamethrower Trap. I think it's particularly good when it comes to locking down dangerous areas. The slower the game gets, the stronger skills like that will be. Very good in situations like blight maps. Very good for... it was very good actually during Heist League. I played a Flamethrower Trapper, and when you had that very scary moment when the doors were opening, when Heist first came out and it was quite overtuned, you just chucked a couple of Flamethrower Traps, throw in a Void Sphere. Felt excellent. We've seen that traps aren't really being hit at all by the nerfs, so I wouldn't let this stop you from playing Flamethrower Trap, but I wouldn't make this shouldn't make you excited to play Flamethrower Trap. So anyway, if you are an experienced Flamethrower Trapper, please leave your comments down below about whether or not you found actually, yes, the more cast speed you got, the better or worse the skill felt. But I wouldn't classify this as a buff. At least I wouldn't classify it as a noteworthy enough buff to include it in the developer manifesto. I would have just kind of like shoved it into the patch notes. And it does seem odd to me to remove functionality from a skill gem. And as my final closing argument, if in fact cast speed was a DPS loss and has always been a DPS loss, and everyone's known it's always been a DPS loss, then why did they make that part of the core mechanic? Like, if that's the case, where they're like, we've made this trap skill, and the thing that's special about it is it scales with cast speed, and it's actually really bad to get cast speed, why did they design it that way? It doesn't make sense. So the whole thing just seems kind of bizarre. But anyway, I'm Tarke. That's Paint. It is sweaty in the UK. Have a good day. Bye-bye.